I said on that podcast that I was as far as I know, I am ready to stand corrected, the founding charter member of the John Mason Hodges fan club and current president. But I know after listening yet again to Mr. Hodges, we'll have plenty of you here that would be willing to serve in the next role as that president of that fan club. He's going to talk to you about beauty and worship. It's going to take 40 minutes or so. So let's give him a round of applause. You're welcome.
Thank you, thank you. As far as I know, he's also the only member of that club. My wife was in it, but she quit. Oh, my. Well, I have this pastor friend who I love dearly. He's a great guy and theologically very sound. And we were talking about music one day, and he said, John, he always used to call me John, John, it doesn't make any difference what style music we sing in the church as long as the words are biblical. And I wanted to say, what planet did you come from? How on earth does anybody think that? But that actually is not an uncommon notion. And so it dawned on me, maybe I could do a little experiment here to test out that theory. Does it make any difference what style the music is to get the words across? If you were going to say you're a composer and you were going to put a poem to music, and the poem goes, somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue. How would you set that text in order to make it, convey it? Would it make any difference what style you set it in? Maybe we could do a heavy metal version. Somewhere over the rainbow. Or what if you wanted to try and create a piece of music for it, craft music, that would speak of the meaning of the text a little bit? That I don't think would do it well, what I just gave you. But what if you tried to get the idea of a rainbow into the melody? Like maybe the curve of a rainbow. So you might go, somewhere over, way up high, there's a land. It's the beginnings. It's the beginnings. That's what that song is doing. It's reaching up over the rainbow. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land. And it has an echo of it. It starts big and down a little further. And then in the middle of it, it's got this little da 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 da. You know that bit? Da 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 dee da dee da. What are those notes? Those notes speak to us at a kind of primal level, I think. Dee da dee da dee da dee da. It's sort of what children sing. We go nya 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 nya. Da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. That's in there, and so it's a sort of childlike feel to it. And then that little childlike da 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 gets turned into something musical in the sense that it's not just standing still, it moves forward, it moves upward, and to work its way toward the climax of the phrase. So it goes, how does it go? Where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. You hear that goes da 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 dee da dee da dee da. It's the same thing, only a step higher, right? And that sets up, that's where you'll find me. That's what she's saying. That's where I'm going to be. That's where my heart longs to be. This is a secular song. It's not a Christian song specifically, but it's a human song about the longing to be in heaven, to be right with God, to be at peace, to be in a place where there are no more troubles and difficulties. That's why it speaks to people. But it speaks to people not only by way of the words, it speaks to people because it speaks of the connection between the shape of the music and the message that's being told. The other day I was talking about the difference between form and content. Here you have content of a lyric, but you also have the form of the music, and the composer is savvy enough to craft the sound of that music into something that expresses the meaning of the text. Isn't that marvelous? And then, I think the really cleverest part of it is at the very end of the song, where he goes, the composer writes, but she sings, where happy little bluebirds fly. We're back to that dee-da, 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 right? But now they're talking not about the where you'll find me exactly, but I'm going to describe the place itself. That's where happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow. But this is the part that gets me every time. Because at the end of the song, I'm not there. I'm talking about that thing over there. It's still over there. It's the place I want to be, but I'm not. Where happy little bluebirds fly, and that happy little bluebird sound is like the tweeting of birds, too, isn't it? Da-do-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da. Well, that's the little bluebirds tweeting. But then there's a question. If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why can't I? That's what I want. So it's a song about longing. And the music reflects that longing. You've heard of Handel's Messiah, right? Do you know the tenor aria from Handel's Messiah? So, every valley shall be exalted. Do you know that tune? Yeah? Well, Handel writes a really weird little melisma, they call it, where you sing multiple notes on one syllable. He has the tenor sing, shall be exalted, like that. Find yourself a good tenor that really does it right, and you'll know what I mean. But why that? What is that all about? What is that? Why is he putting all that in there? It's just a bunch of hoo-ha, right? Well, what does exalted mean anyway? To be exalted means to be lifted up, right? So here's the music going, it's being lifted up. He's painting with the tones the text of the music. The crooked straight, and the rough places plain. It's not accidental. He's doing it on purpose, right? So there's a connection between what you're singing and what you're saying in a piece of music like that. There's a connection. And that makes for beauty. I want to argue that beauty in our experience is the recognition of the connection between those two things, between the material object, in this case the sound that you're hearing, and the immaterial, the invisible thing that he's referring to. You can't sing about somewhere over the rainbow in a way that disrespects rainbows. Or maybe the positive way to put it is better. The song is better because it actually reflects something of the content of the piece, of the rainbow that's being sung about. And so beauty is that on one side is the experience that we have when we go, I get it. I saw that. I heard that. I see what he's doing there. You know what I mean? That's what we call subjective beauty. But it's tied directly to something that's objective. I'll define those words better in a second. The shape of the music is objective. It's that way whether you acknowledge it to be that way or not. Does that make sense? In other words, it doesn't have anything to do with how you're feeling at the time. When you listen to the piece, you hear that it doesn't go, somewhere over the rainbow. It goes somewhere with that big octave leap upward, you see. It's there. It's just there. And you, in your imagination, are taken to reflecting on that thing. And not just the shape of the rainbow anymore either, but something less tangible than that even, just the heart's longing to be in that peaceful place. But objectivity and subjectivity need definition. And so I want to try and explain what I mean by those, because I don't want you to leave here thinking how most people think about those two words. Most people think that objective means absolute and subjective means relative. And that's not what I mean. If you have an object, a piece of music, a painting, a poem, a hymnal, and I describe the object, excuse me, in this case, the shape of the music. This object is white with red letters. I'm describing it objectively. That is, I'm talking about the object. If I tell you how I feel when I come in contact with this object, then I'm telling you about the subject, which is me. In a sentence, I like this book. The subject of the sentence is what? I, right. And what's the object of the sentence? The book, right? So, and that's how I mean objective and subjective. Objective description of a piece of music means I'm describing to you what it is that's actually there, whether you like it or not, whether it turns you on, turns you off, whatever, it doesn't make any difference. It's there. Subjective has to do with how I feel when I see it. What do I experience when I hear this piece of music? Now, the problem in our day is, as I tried to hint at in the Q&A today, is that when our society, our culture, our communities have come in the last couple of hundred years to the decision that all of aesthetic appreciation is subjective, in the terms I'm talking about. In other words, anytime you make any statement about anything about beauty, what you're saying is, I like this, or I don't like this. In other words, I'm speaking to you about me. I'm not speaking to you about it. I'm speaking to you about me, you see. And I do this little experiment with my college students. In the past, I used to do this experiment. I would come into class and I'd say, I want you to imagine a good friend of yours, somebody you know well, comes to you with a CD in his hand. Now, people don't use CDs anymore, I know, but that's how old this reference is. Comes with you with a CD in his hand, and what he says to you is, you got to hear this. This is really good. My question is, what do you hear him saying? What does he mean when he says this is good? And people would think about it for a while, the students would think about it, and eventually one of them would raise his hand and he'd say, he feels good when he hears it. So I'd say, okay, and I'd go over to the blackboard and I'd put, or the whiteboard, I guess, and put on the left-hand side, I'd put feels good when he hears. Okay, what else? Somebody else would say, it makes him excited to start the day. So it's the music he likes to get going in the morning. Okay, so it helps him get rolling in the morning. Okay. Oh, it's something he likes to calm down with when he gets home after work or school or whatever. Okay, I put that up there. Eventually I get a whole list of like 30 different feelings. And then somebody eventually would say, he likes the performers. He likes the artist and the ability that he has on the guitar or whatever. And I would purposefully walk all the way over to the other side of the and I'd write down performance. And we'd keep going at this for, 15, 20 minutes sometimes. And eventually I'd have a whole list of things over here, and I'd only have 3 things over here. And those 3 things were performance, composition, and content. Now, why did I separate them? As they went, it began to dawn on them why I separated them out. And they were because the performance and the composition and the content describe the object. These other things describe the subject. Now, both of them are legitimate. It's not that one is true and the other is not. You do feel when you hear music, don't you? I can hardly talk about Somewhere Over the Rainbow without tearing up. Because it touches me at such a deep level, It's a human desire, a longing that is not fulfilled. It's sort of a tragic song in a way. So it's beautiful in that way, that it has a connection between the material and the immaterial. But then there's a relationship between these two sides of the blackboard, or the whiteboard, whatever. And they are found, I think, in Thomas Aquinas. I think I heard Scott and Noel say something about Thomas, but I'll repeat it if he did. Thomas said, "Beauty is that which pleases upon being seen." And that is all of that side of the board. Pleasure, the pleasure we get in, the feelings we get in being exposed to this thing. But he also said, beauty is that which has the characteristics of unity, proportion, and clarity. Now, they probably deserve some unpacking. But before I unpack them, I want to show you that whatever they mean, and even if we disagree with them, what Thomas was pointing to was this side of the board. Do you see? He was saying that there are characteristics of that work that are there, whether you admit they're there or whether you feel anything about them when you see them. They're there. Either it has unity or it doesn't. It either has proportion or it doesn't. It either has clarity or it doesn't. Now, what he meant was unity means that the thing itself has a kind of wholeness to it. Proportion means that the elements in it are in ratio with one another in some kind of pleasing order. And then clarity has to do with how clear the message of that thing is that comes across to you. That the extraneous things are blotted out and the essential meaning of it is projected. And if it has that, and when he says clarity, he means like radiance. It has this ability to radiate its meaning and its presence and so on in your mind when you actually come in contact with it. And Thomas didn't seem in the Middle Ages was known for a phrase, the medieval synthesis. Have you ever heard that phrase before? Medieval synthesis. The medievals were convinced that the spiritual and the physical had to be in relationship, right relationship with each other. And so they would create cathedrals, for example, based on this idea that they could put windows and stained glass and thin walls and so on in a Gothic cathedral in order to get light into the building, and that light symbolizes the presence of God. So they wanted a building that was built in such a way that when you came into it, you sensed the presence of God. Symbolically, mind you. But that's what they wanted. They thought it's important for us to somehow dovetail those two things together. They thought the vertical and the horizontal ought to go together in some way, those seemingly contradictory things. The spiritual and the physical, the human and the spiritual. All of those things had to be somehow brought together. The philosophy and the theology needed to work together. Our sociology, our anthropology, all those things had to work together with what we know from Revelation. All those things had to be synthesized. And in the Renaissance that comes later, and far more in the Enlightenment period, you find a tearing apart of these things and even a prioritizing of the physical over the spiritual, the rational over the revelatory, and so on. But in the Middle Ages, they really were interested in that. Thomas is the height of the Middle Ages, the height of the high Middle Ages. He died in, I want to say 1274, I think that's right. Anyway, he saw that there was a subjective aspect of beauty, and he saw that there was an objective aspect of beauty. And in his mind, those two things needed to be synthesized just like everything else. So why is that so important? Well, beauty is this harmonization of diverse things. Things that don't necessarily immediately fit together can be found to fit together. And when you find how they fit together, you see a kind of harmony. And that's beautiful. Now, why do we find that beautiful? Why is it that every artist that ever lived, even if he's not a Christian, has always found the need to unify diversity, to diversify unity, to bring the two, unity and diversity, together in the work? If you think about it, if you're a painter, if you are a composer or anything else, you don't want to have your piece be too unified because then it's boring. And you don't want your piece to be too diverse because then it's chaotic. But you want some kind of relationship of those two. And if you don't have it, you're not satisfied as an artist. Even if you can't express it in your own words, your artistic sensibility is kind of off-put, you know. Well, why is it? I want to know why it is that that kind of synthesis is a desirable thing for human beings in general, mind you, not just Christians. Well, I think it's because that's how God is, and that's how God made the world to be. Think about human beings. We are told in Genesis 2:7 that God made man out of the dust of the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul, we're told in the King James Version. There are other versions that say other things. But a soul turns out to be something that is a combination of dust and breath, the physical and the spiritual together. If you take away one or the other of those things, it's uncanny anymore. In fact, if you think about it like this, I hope I'm not repeating myself too much. All of horror movies, I think, kind of fall into one or the other of two genres. Either they're zombie movies or they're ghost movies, basically. You have zombies, which are the dust without the breath, and you have ghosts that are the breath without the dust. Isn't that interesting? Each of them is uncanny. If somebody said, there's a zombie out there, you'd go, ooh, I don't like the feel of that. That's not good. Or there's a ghost in this room. You know, you'd say, oh, gee, that's uncanny. That's weird. I don't know what to do with that, right? But if you put the two of them together, it's just Jared. I mean, you know, there's nothing specifically scary about Jared. She's just, you know, any of us. You look around the room, there are all these people who are those two things together. They're unified. And we don't find them that frightening. Well, Jared is frightening, but we don't talk about that. So beauty is a kind of harmony, like human beings are a kind of harmony. Marriage is another kind of harmony, where you take two disparate things and you put them together and they become one, don't they? In fact, I think that's a good reason to think that God has a sense of humor. It takes two people who are too young to know any better and have no idea that the other is as different as he is, or he or she is, and then says, I want you to promise to be together forever. Ha, 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 ha. But that's a great thing. It's a great thing. The incarnation itself is a combination of two things, isn't it? It's the invisible God made manifest in physical presence. He is all God and all man, all at the same time. And what's more, if we want to know God, we have to have Jesus. Isn't that interesting? Because he said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one, you see. So here again are two disparate things, in this, not disparate in the moral sense, but disparate in the sense that one is physical and the other is intangible, not physical. But the two of them somehow are together. And given that he didn't leave this earth and leave a body behind, he ascended in the body, they're still together. It's an astonishing idea. But that's what God does, you see. He brings things that are disparate and he brings them together and makes a new thing out of it. Why is that? Well, obviously, because the Trinity itself is that way. He himself, he themself, number gets squirrely when you start talking about the Trinity. But he is one person, three persons and one God, right? He is unified completely. There's nothing that any of them thinks apart from the others. They're all of one mind, the three of them. And yet they're one and three individuals at the same time, three persons. Well, if that's how he is, then maybe his whole creation has that sort of property, like a thumbprint of the triune God on the world. All of this is to try and explain why we think certain things are beautiful. Beautiful has to do with this juxtaposition of the physical manifestation of something that you can't see. Language is this way too, actually, isn't it? When we speak of God as a king, we know kings. Well, he's like a king. In fact, he's more like a king than any king you've ever known. But still, that's a worthy description. It's a word that is worthwhile. It gives you insight into who it is you're talking about. So the word K-I-N-G stands in for something that you can't see. Same thing with shepherd or brother or father or any of the other shepherd, like good shepherd. All of those are words that we assign, not that we assign actually, that he assigns. He called himself those things, and in doing so, he opens our eyes to something that we can't see otherwise. The ability to unpack that metaphor is the ability to know deeply. This is why when they were asking me yesterday what the purpose is of the arts, I said, the arts are for the purposes of exercising our imaginations so that we can better understand the revelation of God. The ultimate idea of anything should be to glorify God. So, now we come to worship. What do we do with all of this knowledge about what's beautiful and why it's important? Because it reflects something of the nature of the God who made the world and the way he made the world, all the things that he made. Why now, or how now, can we go about applying that to what we choose as far as music is concerned in the worship service? Well, I would like to say that music for the medievals is the definition of music that the medievals had is something that we have to regain. They called it an art. And we still use that word generally to talk about music, any other art. But an art for the medievals didn't mean just a piece of music or a painting or something like that. It meant a skill. If someone was an artist, that meant he was skilled in a particular form of creativity. In the Middle Ages, the word musician wasn't used, for example, for performers. A violinist wasn't called a musician. He was called a performer. And it wasn't even used for composers. Composers were thought of as kind of, geniuses, mad geniuses that can pull melodies out of the air, create them out of nothing kind of thing. But they weren't called musicians. They were called composers. The word musician was relegated to those who understood the math about music, about the physics of music, that music itself is founded on the way God made the world to work, that harmony is actually built into the way he made things to vibrate. How much time have I got? 9 minutes? If I have time, I'll give you an example on the piano. But anyway, it's a skill with that knowledge. I understand how harmonics work. That's what the medieval musician was all about. He's sort of an intellectual descendant of Pythagoras, a pre-Socratic philosopher who evaluated, understood harmonies. Well, I also want to say that when we start thinking about music, we need that skill for one very good and important principle. We need the skill in music. We need to know something about how music works and how you can craft beauty in music, which is to take the shape of the music and the thing you're trying to convey and make them work together. Why? Well, I think it's partly because of a principle, and that is that we should never give God anything that didn't cost us something. You remember that story about King David, and they ransacked some tribe, and they gave him all these animals in order to sacrifice to the Lord, and he refused to do it. And he refused to do it with that line. He said, I'm not going to give God anything that didn't cost me anything. And I think we need to think that way too, because what we offer in terms of music in the worship service is not, it's gotten backwards so that we think music in the worship service is for us. But it's not. It's a means by which we offer ourselves to him. It's an act of service, do you see? And that's why you have to think about the rhythms and the melodies and the harmonies in the song that you're singing. Because you need to craft it as a composer in such a way that the congregation can do it, can offer themselves to God with it, you see? There are a lot of popular songs nowadays that I know are a lot of fun, and they're fun to listen to, and people want to sing them in church. But they want to sing them in church because they like them themselves. But it turns out that it's not really written to be sung by a congregation at all. And it's very hard to get all the rhythms and the bends of pitches and the little idiosyncrasies of popular music out of a congregation. So in other words, we're still thinking often that we're hearing this music in order that we ourselves might be entertained, as it were. I don't mean to make it too self-serving, but it is basically for us. And I think when that pastor said to me, it doesn't matter what style it is, as long as the words are biblical, he was saying the style of the music is simply a matter of personal preference. That's all it is to it. So this congregation likes reggae music, and that congregation likes jazz, and so on. Why don't you just do their favorite thing? But I think that misunderstands beauty. Because, well, I'll tell you one more thing and then I'll tell you that. The other thing is, not only should we never give God something that doesn't cost us anything, but what we should give him is our unblemished lambs. That is the very best that we've got. When we make a sacrifice to him, and a song is a sacrifice to him, we ought to be giving him the best we have. I've told this story before too, but a buddy of mine in England was playing in the church, playing his piano. He's a music director, and a fellow came in and said, "Here, Bob, I want to show you this. God gave me this song." And so he put it, let's take a look. Put it on the piano, started playing through it. He handed it back to him and said, "No, he didn't. Go back and work on it some more." Not the God I know that spoke the world into existence. No, not that guy. In other words, we think, well, I'm just good. If it's Christian, well, then it's good, right? We need to craft the best work we've got to offer to God. Now, that doesn't dictate that everybody in every church has to sing obscure Palestrina motets every Sunday. That's not what I'm saying, as though that's the best thing that we can give. It's the best thing that we can give, we personally, we in this church, in this place, in that church, in that place. If the best we've got is a guitarist that is working on playing really well, and he's what we've got, we offer that, okay? So don't hear me being sort of elitist about this. I'm just saying that what our attitude is often, what do I like, not what's the best thing to offer. And when you start changing over to what's the best thing to offer, you start thinking about all those objective aspects. Is it good performance? Is it good composition, especially? We agree that the content has to be biblical, but the composition part of it often goes by the wayside, and that's the important one. So don't offer anything that doesn't cost you time and energy and expertise, and don't offer a second-rate offering. Give them the best you got. And if you do that, I think it will refocus your attention in worship and in your planning of worship. This is for pastors and for music directors and so on, ministers, to think about what we need to be doing in our services, and not so much how can we most likely attract people to come to the service or something. That's a wimpy argument. That's a wimpy reason for doing things. So let me end with saying why I think this performance, composition, content aspect is really a good thing to have. It gives Christians the opportunity to do a couple of really good things. One, to tell somebody, just because the text that you've put to music is biblical doesn't mean that it's a good song. Go back and work on it some more, you see. It's not a subjective feeling that I have. It's that there's nothing there. There's very little there to call it good. Call it good. But there's another reason why it's important for us to be discerning about these things, and that is to recognize the gifts that unbelievers have in the arts, because those gifts are from God. Whether they acknowledge them or not is a different matter. So somebody comes to you and says, hey, I've written this piece of music, and you realize that he has really honed this thing. It works great, it makes a lot of sense, and it conveys the message that he wants to convey wonderfully, but the message itself is not biblical, or the message itself is, nihilism or something. Well, what do? Do you just say, nope, that's terrible, get it out of here, I don't want to have anything to do with it? Or do you say, I see the craft, the compositional excellence, I see the performance excellence, but I want to talk to you about the content. You see? So rather than embracing bad music just because it's got Christian words, or rejecting good music because it's got no Christian words, what we want, of course, is the combination of the two, don't we? But we ought to be able to take that Philippians 4 passage about whatsoever is good and noble and of good report, think on those things. We ought to be able to apply that to our music and call on it to give us excellence, give us well-crafted work. And if we find that well-crafted work from somebody who's not a believer, I remember one time I was conducting a church choir in rehearsal, and they had a telephone, a little intercom telephone here next to the conductor's station, and I made a joke to the choir. I said, "Oh, what's this for?" I see it's so that I can call Mozart and ask him, what this is a direct line to heaven. I'll talk to, and I was just making a stupid joke, And one of the women looked very stone-faced, and she says, "We don't do Mozart here." Okay. That's how they saw it. He's not a Christian. He may not have been. I can't vouch for that. But boy, could he compose. Okay. I guess I better wrap up. In the end, worship is only one way that we use music. And it has its own sort of extra criteria, because you have to have it in such a way that the congregation can join in. Ever since the Reformation, it's in the Reformation really from Luther that we get this idea that the congregation ought to be singing, not just the monks up here in the front, but everybody ought to be offering, you see. And so congregational music has ever since become, the last 500 years, become a very big part of Protestant worship. So what we choose and how we choose it and what we decide on for our congregation to sing has generational effects. And I think it's extremely important that we regain the notion that there is a connection between how it's crafted and what it's trying to say, and return to a kind of synthesis of the objective and the subjective. Okay? Thanks for hearing me. I've enjoyed it here. I think we have 5 minutes maybe, or 10, right, Jared? Oh, I'm over time. All right. Can I do one little thing for you? Is this still on? Good. I want you to hear that God actually created things to vibrate a certain way, and that we've built our pianos and our violins and our instruments and so on that physics. The long string here in the low part. Uh-oh, am I too close to the monitor? There we go. This long string here is vibrating at its entire length, and that's the pitch that you hear. If you make the string shorter, pitch goes up, right? You make it longer and hold the tension the same, pitch goes down. So we have a very long string at this end of the piano. But that string also vibrates at its midpoint, at its exact half point. And it vibrates at its 1/3 point, and its 1/4 point, and its 1/5 point, and 6th, and 7th, and 8th, and like that. So the unit fractions of any string vibrate in addition to the entire length of the string. And when it does, it generates higher pitches, right? When you have a shorter string, you get a pitch that's higher. Well, when you listen to that, if you listen carefully, you're not hearing only one note. You're hearing several notes. Can you hear this one? Listen for this pitch in that low note. Can you hear it? And can you hear this one? That's in there too. Listen for this. There it is. I can hear it. Can you hear it? It's just very faint on top. Listen for that note. Did you hear it? That means that these other notes, this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, are all in that string. Weird, huh? If you divide that string in half, and this works for any string, I'm just picking one. If you divide this C in half, you get this note, exactly an octave higher. And if you divide this string into thirds, you get this note. And if you divide that note into fourths, it's another octave higher. It's this C again. So now you've got, and a 1/5 of the string sounds like this. And so in that low string, you actually hear this. Isn't that interesting? It's just the way God made the string to vibrate. We didn't make that up. It just does it naturally. Now, the way to prove it is for me to hold, you know how the piano works, right? You've got these strings here and dampers against them, and if you push down on the keys, the damper comes off the string and the hammer hits the string, and then it rings as long as it needs, as long as you don't dampen it again. So it's vibrating and vibrating. When I let go of it, it stops. See? Okay, well, what if I push down these notes, but I only push them down so gently that it takes the dampers off the string, but it doesn't actually make the hammers hit the string. So they're open now to the air. You can't hear them because I haven't hit them with anything to vibrate them. But I'm going to play this low note and let go of it and see if you can't hear a sympathetically vibrated upper string. We're going to listen for that sound. Okay? Keep that in mind. I'm going to press them down now. They're free now. And I'll play the low note and get rid of it. Can you hear it? That one's real loud. Yeah, the third I don't hear so well, but it's in there. Maybe if I put it up a little higher. Hold on. Hear that one? Hear that note? That's pretty loud, that note. If it's off in tuning just a little bit, it doesn't work just right. And the piano is well tempered anyway. It's adjusted, sort of, so it doesn't always work just right. But the point is, if you can hear, let's see, how can I find a good one to do? I'll play this, how about? And I'm arguing that those are all in that low note. Yeah, there they are. Can you hear that? It's really soft. But let me pick something else that's not in that low string. How about this? Listen for those pitches. Silence. Nothing. But if I go back to the ones that are actually unit fractions of that, there they are. Isn't that amazing? And that's how we built the instrument. That we built the piano and the violin to vibrate this way, trumpets with an airflow. All of them have the same physical background. And that's why music is beautiful, because you can have something that sounds like home, and then you can have something that sounds like tension that wants to lead back to that again. And so because because these notes are not in this note, let me listen for them. They're not there, but the ones that it resolves to are. There they are. So when you play a bass note like that, you're implying a whole system of pitches above that bass note. Some of them are going to sound in consonance with it. Some of them are going to sound in tension with it. Somebody goes, sorry, and stops there. I can't stand it, right? We want to hear the resolution, and that's what music is. It's all about tensions and resolutions, setting up a home world, going away from that world, and then coming back to it again. And so music can tell stories. Music can volumes. And that's why some music fits certain texts and not others. Does that make sense? Okay. Thanks, Jared, for the extra time. All right, I'm out of here. Jared's up next.